The moment that changed my life didn't arrive with noise or drama. It came quietly, disguised as a normal school day, and it stole something from me before I even understood what I was losing. I was 18 years old, standing at the front of my classroom with a thin stack of papers shaking slightly in my hands. I had practiced the presentation so many times that the words lived in my chest, ready to come out smoothly. I remember thinking, if I do this well, maybe he'll finally see me. He was known for being brilliant, strict, untouchable. In my family, teachers like him were spoken about with reverence. If a teacher criticizes you, it's for your own good, my mother always said. I believed that. I trusted him. I barely finished my first paragraph when he interrupted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. That somehow made it worse. He leaned back in his chair, tapped his pen once against the desk, and sighed long and theatrical, as if I had exhausted him simply by existing. "You'll never amount to anything," he said calmly, not with thinking like this. The room froze. I felt every pair of eyes move toward me, then quickly away, like my failure was contagious. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I wanted to explain. I wanted to ask what I'd done wrong. I wanted to fix it. He didn't let me. He took my paper, glanced at it for less than 5 seconds, and wrote a failing grade across the top in red ink. Then he handed it back to me without looking up. Sit down. That was it. No explanation, no guidance, no chance. I walked back to my seat on legs that felt borrowed, like they didn't belong to me anymore. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure others could hear it. I kept my head down, staring at the red mark bleeding through the page, while something inside me collapsed inward. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was betrayal. A teacher is supposed to correct you, not define you. But in that moment, his words wrapped themselves around my future like a verdict. After class, no one spoke to me, not because they were cruel, but because they were relieved it hadn't been them. I understood that instinct immediately. Silence spreads faster than cruelty. At home that evening, my mother asked how school was. Fine, I said. That was the first lie I told to protect myself. I didn't tell my parents that I had been humiliated in front of the class. I didn't tell them that the person they trusted had reduced me to a sentence. In our family, questioning authority felt like disrespect. So I swallowed it. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself grades weren't everything. But when I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, his words replayed in my mind with unbearable clarity. "You'll never amount to anything." I began to examine myself the way he had. Maybe I wasn't confident enough. Maybe my voice really was too soft. Maybe I didn't belong in rooms where people spoke loudly and expected certainty. I had always been gentle. I listened more than I spoke. I believed effort mattered more than volume. Until that day, I thought those were strengths. The next morning, I sat in the same classroom, but I felt different. Smaller, invisible in a way I had never felt before. When a question was asked, I knew the answer, but I didn't raise my hand. I couldn't risk being wrong again. I couldn't survive another public dismissal. That was how it started. Not with failure, but with fear. Over time, fear taught me silence. Silence taught me distance. And distance slowly taught me how much power a single careless sentence can hold when it comes from someone we trust. I didn't know it then, but that day didn't end my voice. It buried it, and buried things don't disappear. They wait. Silence doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in slowly, like dust you don't notice until everything feels heavier. After that day in class, I learned how to disappear without leaving the room. I still attended lectures. I still took notes. I still completed assignments, but I stopped offering pieces of myself. I chose answers that sounded safe. I avoided opinions. I became careful in a way that felt mature at first, and hollow soon after. At home, my failure became a quiet disappointment no one wanted to examine too closely. My parents didn't accuse me. That would have been easier. Instead, they adjusted their expectations without ever saying they were doing it. Conversations about my future grew shorter. My achievements were met with polite nods rather than excitement. When my younger brother spoke confidently about his plans, the room leaned toward him without realizing it. No one meant to hurt me. That truth made it more painful. In my family, love was practical. They believed pressure made people stronger. They believed criticism built character. So when I became quieter, more reserved, they assumed I was being realistic. Sensible, mature, I didn't correct them. I told myself that being unnoticed was safer than being misjudged. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, someone would eventually see the truth without me having to explain it. But silence has a cost. In college, I avoided courses that required presentations. I sat in the back rows. I listened carefully to others, studying how confidence sounded when spoken aloud. I learned to be competent without being visible. Professors described me as reliable and serious and never promising and never exceptional. Each time I swallowed a thought instead of sharing it, I felt a small sting of recognition. I knew I was choosing comfort over courage, but I didn't yet have the strength to do otherwise. At home, the distance grew subtly. Family gatherings became performances where everyone played their assigned role. My brother, ambitious and outspoken. My parents, proud but tired, me, the dependable one, the one who would figure things out. Sometimes my mother would ask, "Are you happy?" I would smile and say yes. That became my second habit of silence. The truth was more complicated. I wasn't unhappy. I was unfinished. I was carrying a version of myself that had never been given room to breathe. There were nights when I replayed that classroom moment, not with anger, but with confusion. I wondered how many choices I had made since then were truly mine, and how many were shaped by a fear I never named out loud. What hurt most wasn't what my teacher had said. It was how easily I had believed him. Still, something inside me resisted completely disappearing. I began to notice patterns, how louder voices were mistaken for smarter ones, how certainty, even when wrong, was rewarded more than hesitation. I observed how people with authority spoke, and how rarely they were questioned. Observation became my quiet education. I worked part-time jobs and watched managers who ruled through intimidation and others who led through calm consistency. I paid attention to which teams stayed loyal and which dissolved under pressure. I learned that dignity didn't announce itself. It showed up, day after day, in how people treated those who could offer them nothing. Slowly, almost without permission, I began to rebuild myself not outwardly, but internally. I wrote when no one was watching. I studied subjects that interested me, not ones that impressed others. I learned how to listen deeply and speak precisely. I stopped trying to be liked and focused on being clear. The silence didn't vanish, it transformed, it became space, space to think, space to choose, space to decide who I wanted to become without asking for approval. I didn't confront my family. I didn't correct their assumptions. I let time do the explaining I couldn't yet give voice to. What I didn't know then was that silence, when chosen consciously, can become preparation. And preparation, unlike fear, doesn't shrink you. It steadies you. By the end of those years, I was no longer the girl who had been failed in front of a class. I was someone quietly becoming. By the time the invitation arrived, my life no longer resembled the one that had been quietly shrinking all those years ago. The email appeared on an ordinary afternoon, tucked between project updates and meeting reminders. I almost ignored it. The subject line read, "Keynote Speaker Invitation Alumni Leadership Series." I assumed it was a mistake. My name had never belonged in rooms that celebrated voices. I opened it anyway, The message was polite, professional, almost formal. The school wanted a former student who had demonstrated long-term resilience, thoughtful leadership, and sustained impact. I had been recommended by a board member who had followed my work for years. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. The memory surfaced instantly, the classroom, the red mark, the sentence that had followed me through so many silent decisions. I felt a faint tightening in my chest, not sharp like before, but familiar. Old pain doesn't shout. It whispers. My first instinct was to decline, not out of fear, out of distance. I had built a life rooted in quiet confidence by then. My career wasn't loud, but it was solid. I led teams who trusted me because I listened before I spoke. I made decisions carefully and owned them fully. People didn't follow me because I dominated a room. They followed me because I didn't disappear from it either. Somewhere along the way, I had learned the difference. That evening, I took a walk and let the invitation sit unanswered. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed fairness was guaranteed and authority was always deserved. I realized I wasn't angry with her teacher anymore. I was grateful I no longer needed his approval. The next morning, I accepted. Preparation didn't make me nervous. I had spoken in boardrooms, negotiated contracts, mentored younger professionals. Still, something about returning to that building felt heavier. Memory has weight. So does growth. The day of the event, the auditorium was brighter than I remembered. The chairs were newer, the walls freshly painted. Yet the air carried the same quiet anticipation it always had. When I stepped onto the stage, I didn't scan the audience at first. I focused on my breathing, on the calm I had earned through years of choosing clarity over validation. Then I looked up. He was sitting in the front row, older, thinner, his posture slightly curved now. His hair was grayer, his expression more reserved. He studied the program in his hands, unaware of who was standing before him. He didn't recognize me. That realization surprised me with its gentleness. I felt no urge to announce myself. No need to reclaim a moment that no longer belonged to me. As I began to speak, my voice was steady. I talked about unseen effort, about people who grow slowly not because they lack potential, but because their roots go deep before they rise. I spoke about leadership as responsibility, not authority, about how words spoken casually can shape someone's courage for years. I didn't accuse. I didn't expose. I watched the audience respond, not with applause, but with stillness. The kind that means listening. I noticed him then, his attention shifting, his brow furrowing slightly. Something in my words unsettled him not as an attack, but as recognition. I continued, choosing my sentences with care. There are people who don't bloom in environments that reward volume. I said, they bloom where patience exists. I saw him look up fully then. Not at me, but at himself. When I finished, the applause was warm, measured. I stepped away from the podium feeling lighter than I expected. I hadn't come to be seen. I had come to speak the truth gently, and leave it where it belonged. For the first time, I understood that becoming doesn't require permission. It only requires time, intention, and the courage to remain when silence once felt safer. When the auditorium emptied, I stayed behind for a moment, letting the quiet return. Applause has a way of fading quickly, but silence after truth feels different. It feels earned. I gathered my notes slowly, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to remain present in my body. 10 years earlier, I would have rushed out, afraid of being seen too clearly. Now I moved at my own pace. That's when he approached me. Up close, he looked smaller than he had in my memory, not diminished, just human. His confidence, once sharp and effortless, had softened into something cautious. Time does that to authority. It removes its armor. Excellent speech, he said, extending his hand, thoughtful, measured, I shook it calmly. "Thank you," I replied. He asked where I had studied, what path I had taken, how long I had been working in my field. Ordinary questions, professional curiosity, no trace of recognition yet. Then I told him. His eyes paused just briefly as my name settled into place. I watched the moment arrive, not dramatically but quietly. Recognition doesn't always come with shock. Sometimes it comes with weight. He withdrew his hand slowly. "You were in my class," he said, more to himself than to me. Yes, the space between us filled with everything neither of us said, the red ink, the sentence, the silence that followed for years. "I hope," he began, then stopped. His voice shifted. "I hope I didn't discourage you." There it was. Not an apology, but an opening. 10 years earlier, I would have rushed to fill it. I would have explained how much it hurt, how long it followed me, how deeply I had doubted myself. I would have needed him to understand, but I didn't need that anymore. I learned a lot. I said honestly, "Just not in the way you probably intended." He nodded slowly. There was something like regret in his eyes, not dramatic, not performative. Just present. We stood there a moment longer, two people shaped by the same memory in very different ways. Then I smiled, not tightly, not politely, genuinely. "I hope your students are doing well," I said, and I meant it. That night I returned home alone. I made tea. I sat by the window and watched the city lights come on, one by one. There was no rush to call anyone, no need to recount the moment in detail. Closure doesn't always ask for witnesses. I thought about my family, their quiet expectations, their unspoken assumptions. I realized I didn't feel angry anymore. Distance had given me clarity. They loved in the ways they knew how. I no longer needed them to see every part of me to respect myself. The truth had revealed itself through time, not confrontation. I had learned where to place my boundaries. I had learned whose opinions deserved space inside me, and whose did not. Respect, I understood now, begins internally and radiates outward. The justice wasn't that he recognized me. The justice was that I didn't need him to. Some people carry power briefly. Others carry purpose quietly, and purpose, when lived with integrity, has a way of answering every doubt without raising its voice. I slept peacefully that night, not because I had proven anything, but because I had finally learned to stand where I belonged, unapologetically, calmly, and whole.